Some men survive war only to discover the real battlefield was waiting back home. Rain hammered the streets of South Atlanta just after 10:30 p.m., turning the cracked pavement into a river of neon reflections and shattered headlights, while police sirens echoed somewhere in the distance like warnings no one listened to anymore. And under the flickering lights of a gas station on Fulton Industrial Boulevard, 17-year-old Marcus Reed stepped out of his old silver Honda, carrying nothing more dangerous than a plastic bag with cold medicine and orange juice for his little sister, his hoodie damp from the storm, his sneakers splashing through shallow puddles as he hurried toward the entrance without noticing the patrol cruiser slowly rolling into the parking lot behind him. Officer Daniel Briggs sat in the driver's seat, with one hand resting near his radio, his jaw tight. His eyes narrowing the second he saw Marcus, because in his mind certain neighborhoods only produced one kind of story, and young black men after dark were always suspects before they were human beings. Run the plate. Briggs muttered while his partner glanced at the computer screen glowing pale blue against the windshield. The dispatch radio crackled through static and rang. Vehicle possibly matches description from earlier robbery report. And that was all Briggs needed to hear, because once fear mixes with bias, the truth rarely gets a chance to speak. Marcus pushed open the gas station door, unaware that two officers had already stepped out into the rain behind him, their boots splashing hard against the pavement, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like weapons searching for permission to escalate. "Hey, hands where I can see them," Briggs shouted, his voice so sharp it froze the entire parking lot. And Marcus immediately turned around, startled, confusion washing across his face as customers near the pumps slowly backed away, phones already lifting into the air to record another night that felt too familiar in this city. "Sir, did I do something wrong?" Marcus asked quietly, keeping both hands visible while rain rolled down his forehead and soaked through his hoodie. But Briggs was already moving closer, already deciding the ending before the conversation even began. "Step away from the vehicle," he barked while another officer circled toward the passenger side with his hand hovering near his holster. And for a second the storm itself seemed to go silent as Marcus obeyed every command exactly the way his father had taught him years ago. Calm voice, slow movements, no sudden gestures. Survive the encounter first and ask questions later. Imagine standing there at 17 years old, surrounded by flashing lights and loaded assumptions, realizing the people sworn to protect you are studying your skin before they ever hear your words, because Marcus could feel it happening in real time. The suspicion, the tension, the quiet hatred buried beneath procedure. And somewhere across the city his father still believed his son was safely on the way home, unaware that destiny was already pulling him toward the darkest moment of his life. Briggs grabbed Marcus by the arm and spun him toward the hood of the car, while thunder cracked overhead. "We got reports about a stolen vehicle," he snapped. And Marcus shook his head immediately, terrified but controlled. "This is my dad's car, sir. I can show you the registration." But before he could even finish speaking, another loud noise exploded somewhere behind the gas station, metal crashing against concrete in the alleyway nearby. And in one terrifying instant, every officer in that parking lot reacted at once as fear took over reason, and Officer Briggs reached for his weapon, while Marcus stood frozen beneath the rain, realizing too late that nobody there was actually seeing him as a kid anymore. The sound behind the gas station lasted less than 2 seconds. A crashing metal dumpster knocked over by the wind and rain somewhere deep inside the alley. But in the minds of frightened officers already expecting danger, those 2 seconds changed everything as flashlights jerked wildly across the darkness, and Officer Briggs shouted commands over one another with the panic of men losing control of the situation they created themselves. "Do not move," Briggs yelled while Marcus stood frozen beside the hood of the Honda, his chest rising fast, both hands visible in the cold rain, confusion and fear flooding his face, because he could see it now, the way their fingers tightened, the way their breathing changed, the way the entire moment suddenly stopped feeling like a misunderstanding and started feeling like survival. Across the parking lot, a woman pumping gas lowered her phone slightly and whispered, "Oh my God," while another customer backed behind the convenience store door as if instinct alone told him something terrible was about to happen. And through all of it, Marcus tried to hold himself together exactly the way his father taught him years earlier during difficult conversations no child should ever have to learn. If police stop you, keep your voice calm. Keep your hands where they can see them. Do not give fear permission to control the room. Elias Reed had spoken those words at the kitchen table countless nights while Marcus sat listening quietly beside a bowl of cereal, never fully understanding why his father looked so serious every time he repeated them. But now, standing beneath flashing red and blue lights with rain dripping from his eyelashes, Marcus finally understood every word. "I did not do anything," Marcus said carefully, barely louder than the storm itself. But Briggs moved closer anyway, grabbing the back of Marcus's hoodie and forcing him harder against the vehicle, while another officer searched the inside of the car with rushed movements, tossing aside school papers, robotic sketches, and an old basketball hoodie lying in the passenger seat. "Looks clean," the younger officer muttered uncertainly. But Briggs was too deep inside his own assumptions to slow down now, because once certain men decide what you are, evidence becomes an inconvenience instead of the truth. Somewhere downtown, nearly 15 miles away, Elias Reed sat alone inside a dim apartment office overlooking the city skyline, reviewing security consulting reports beneath the soft glow of a desk lamp, while an old military challenge coin rested beside his coffee mug, untouched for hours, and despite the calmness surrounding him, there was something restless in the air that night, the kind of silence veterans recognize without explanation, the kind that settles into your bones before disaster arrives. Then his phone vibrated across the desk. Elias glanced down, expecting another work email. But instead he saw an unknown number followed by shaky audio and screaming in the background. "Sir, I think this is your son," a frightened voice said through static and rain. And before the stranger could continue, Elias was already standing, his chair sliding backward across the floor as every instinct sharpened at once with terrifying precision. Back at the gas station, the storm intensified, thunder rolling low above Atlanta while Officer Briggs paced near the cruiser, trying to regain control of a scene slipping further away from him by the second, because now more people were recording, more headlights were pulling into the parking lot, more witnesses were seeing Marcus exactly as he truly was, terrified, compliant, just a teenager trapped inside someone else's fear. And yet Briggs still could not let go of the version of Marcus he had already invented in his head. Imagine being 17 years old and realizing the most dangerous thing in the parking lot is not what happened in the alley, but the assumption standing 3 feet in front of you wearing a badge and refusing to see your humanity. Because Marcus could feel the tension tightening around him like invisible chains while rainwater mixed with tears he refused to let fall, and somewhere in the distance, cutting through the storm like a warning from another world, the low growl of a black SUV engine began racing toward the gas station. The black SUV tore through the rain-soaked streets of Atlanta with headlights cutting across puddles and broken reflections while Elias Reed gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned pale beneath the dashboard lights. His breathing controlled but heavy, the kind of breathing learned from years of surviving impossible situations where panic meant death and calm meant survival. And although the city around him looked ordinary with late-night diners still glowing and traffic lights blinking against the storm, something deep inside him already knew his life was about to divide into before and after. The anonymous caller remained on speakerphone, their voice trembling through static and sirens. "Sir, your son keeps saying he did not do anything wrong," the man whispered while chaos echoed in the background. And for a moment Elias closed his eyes because hearing those words felt worse than hearing fear itself. It felt familiar, the same helpless truth repeated by too many innocent people who never got the chance to be heard. At the gas station, Marcus remained pressed against the cold hood of the Honda, while rainwater streamed down the side windows and soaked through his jeans, his shoulders trembling not from guilt, but from humiliation as more patrol units arrived one after another, transforming a misunderstanding into a public spectacle under spinning red and blue lights. And every new officer stepping onto the scene seemed to arrive already believing the worst about him before asking a single question. "We still have no weapon," one younger officer said cautiously while checking the alley behind the station again, but Briggs ignored him. Pacing aggressively near the cruiser with frustration burning across his face, because he could feel control slipping away as live streams spread across social media in real time. Strangers already commenting beneath blurry phone footage, some angry, some terrified, others simply exhausted because they had watched versions of this moment unfold too many times before. Marcus looked toward the convenience store window where his own reflection stared back at him beneath flashing lights, and suddenly, he remembered being 12 years old sitting beside his father during a thunderstorm almost exactly like this one, listening while Elias cleaned an old military flashlight at the kitchen table. "Fear makes weak men dangerous," Elias had said quietly without looking up. "Especially when fear hides behind authority." And back then Marcus thought his father was talking about war overseas, not parking lots in Georgia. Tires screeched outside the station as the black SUV finally pulled in fast enough to send water spraying across the curb. And almost instantly something changed in the atmosphere, because even before Elias stepped out, people felt his presence the way people sense incoming storms before thunder arrives. The driver door opened slowly and Elias emerged into the rain wearing a dark jacket over a charcoal shirt, broad-shouldered, calm, his face unreadable except for the sharpness in his eyes that seemed to study every officer, every cruiser position, every witness, every movement within seconds, and unlike everyone else in the parking lot, he was not reacting emotionally. He was assessing the scene with the precision of a man trained to survive under pressure most people could never imagine. "Dad," Marcus called out weakly, relief flooding his voice for the first time all night, and Briggs immediately turned toward Elias with the hard expression of someone already preparing for confrontation. "Stay back, sir," Briggs ordered while resting a hand near his belt, but Elias did not argue, did not shout, did not move recklessly because his calmness carried something heavier than anger, something that made even nearby officers instinctively straighten their posture without understanding why. Imagine arriving to find your child surrounded by flashing lights, treated like a threat in front of strangers, while the men controlling the scene still refuse to admit they made a mistake. Because Elias saw everything instantly, Marcus's shaking hands, the scattered school papers inside the car, the fear in the younger officer's eyes, and most importantly the arrogance radiating from Briggs like a man too proud to reconsider his own assumptions. Rain rolled down Elias Reed's face as he finally spoke, his voice low, controlled, almost quiet beneath the storm. "I want to know exactly why my son was stopped tonight." And for the first time since the situation began, Officer Daniel. Briggs hesitated before answering. Officer Briggs stared at Elias Reed for several long seconds while rain pounded the roof of the cruisers hard enough to drown out the distant traffic beyond the gas station. And although Briggs still held authority over the scene, something about the older man standing in front of him made that authority suddenly feel fragile, uncertain, almost borrowed. "Your son matched the description of a suspect connected to a robbery investigation," Briggs finally answered with forced confidence, but Elias did not react emotionally the way Briggs expected because men like Briggs understood anger. They understood shouting, resistance, chaos, but calmness from another man, especially a black man standing in the middle of a storm while surrounded by police, made them uncomfortable in ways they could never explain. Elias glanced once toward Marcus, whose soaked hoodie clung to his shoulders while red and blue lights flickered across his frightened face. And for a moment something painful moved behind Elias's eyes before disappearing again beneath military discipline sharpened over decades. "Did you find a weapon?" Elias asked quietly, and Briggs hesitated just long enough for nearby officers to notice. "No," one younger officer admitted carefully from beside the patrol car. "We did not recover anything." And the words landed heavily in the cold air, because suddenly everyone standing there had to confront the truth they were trying not to say out loud. Marcus had cooperated. Marcus had complied. Marcus had done exactly what he was told, and still the situation escalated anyway. The live streams continued, spreading online as comments flooded beneath shaky phone footage showing Marcus pinned against the vehicle beneath flashing lights, while strangers argued across social media in real time, some defending the officers automatically, others pointing out the fear visible in Marcus's body language. And somewhere inside the crowd an elderly black woman shook her head slowly and whispered, "Same story every generation," as though exhaustion itself had finally replaced surprise. Elias stepped closer to Marcus without sudden movement and gently placed one hand against his son's shoulder, grounding him, steadying him, reminding him silently that he was no longer alone. And Marcus lowered his eyes for a second because until that moment he had been fighting panic entirely by himself. "Dad, I told them I did not do anything," Marcus said softly, his voice cracking despite his effort to stay composed. And Elias nodded once as though he already knew, because fathers like Elias learned long ago how to recognize fear hidden beneath forced bravery. Then Briggs made the mistake that changed everything. "If your son had just stayed calm from the beginning, none of this would have happened," he muttered while adjusting his vest, and instantly several officers nearby looked uncomfortable because even they understood how unfair the statement sounded after watching Marcus comply the entire time. Elias slowly turned his head toward Briggs, and although his voice remained controlled, something colder entered the atmosphere around him, something disciplined and dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with physical force. "You think he was the one escalating this situation?" Elias asked quietly, and Briggs opened his mouth to answer, but stopped because suddenly he realized this conversation no longer felt like an ordinary confrontation between police and civilians. It felt like being evaluated by someone trained to detect weakness under pressure. Imagine spending your entire life serving your country only to watch your own child treated like a threat because fear reached someone else before facts did. Because Elias Reed had walked through war zones overseas, had survived situations most people only watched in movies. Yet nothing in his military career prepared him for the helplessness of seeing his son standing terrified beneath police lights in his own hometown. The storm intensified overhead as another black SUV slowly pulled into the parking lot behind Elias's vehicle, followed seconds later by a second unmarked truck with dark tinted windows. And almost immediately the posture of the officers began to shift, because men trained in law enforcement recognize federal vehicles the same way soldiers recognize incoming danger. One of the younger officers frowned and whispered under his breath, "Who exactly is this guy?" While Briggs tried to maintain composure despite the tension building visibly around him. But before anyone could ask another question, the rear door of the first SUV opened and a tall man in a dark federal rain jacket stepped out into the storm, scanning the scene with sharp professional eyes before locking directly onto Elias Reed and saying 4 words that made Officer Briggs suddenly feel cold despite the humid Georgia rain. "Commander Reed, we got here fast." The parking lot fell into an eerie silence after the words "Commander Reed" cut through the rain, because suddenly every officer standing beneath the flashing lights realized they were no longer dealing with an ordinary civilian. And even the storm itself seemed quieter for a moment as the federal agent approached Elias with the kind of respect that cannot be faked. Officer Briggs straightened instinctively while trying to hide the uncertainty spreading across his face, but it was already too late, because the shift in power had happened right in front of everyone watching, including the dozens of people live streaming the scene from their phones. The federal agent stopped beside Elias and handed him a waterproof tablet case without another word, while 2 more men stepped from the second SUV, scanning the area with disciplined calm. Their movements precise, professional, coordinated in a way local officers immediately recognized but could not fully place. Marcus looked between his father and the arriving men with confusion, because although Elias had always been private about his military past, Marcus never truly understood the scale of the world his father once operated in. He only knew small fragments, old photographs tucked away in closets, medals hidden in drawers, sleepless nights where Elias sat silently on the apartment balcony staring into the dark as though memories still followed him home from places he never spoke about. "Sir," the younger officer whispered quietly toward Briggs, "I think we should de-escalate this." But Briggs refused to back down, because men like him often mistake pride for strength, especially when witnesses are watching. "This does not change procedure," Briggs snapped defensively while rain dripped from the brim of his cap. "We responded to a possible robbery suspect," and the federal agent slowly turned toward him with an expression that immediately made Briggs regret speaking so confidently. "A robbery suspect," the agent repeated calmly before looking toward Marcus standing soaked and frightened beside the car. "That teenager?" And for the first time all night, Briggs looked unsure of his own narrative, because now the facts sounded weaker every time they were spoken out loud. Elias remained silent through most of it, studying the officers carefully the same way experienced commanders study unstable situations before making decisions because unlike the people around him, Elias understood something dangerous was unfolding beneath the surface of this encounter, something bigger than one traffic stop or one frightened officer. He understood patterns, systems, fear, escalation, and the devastating consequences of authority mixed with bias. Imagine surviving combat zones overseas only to stand helpless while your child becomes another public example of suspicion replacing humanity. Because Elias could see the crowd watching Marcus not like a criminal, but like someone's son, someone's classmate, someone who should have been home doing homework instead of standing drenched beneath police lights trying to prove he deserved basic dignity. One of the federal men quietly opened the waterproof case and activated the tablet, revealing live satellite traffic feeds and dispatch records while rain continued bouncing off the hoods of the patrol cars around them. And within seconds, the younger officers nearby exchanged nervous glances because even they could tell this situation was becoming far more serious than anyone expected. Commander Reed was part of Joint Special Operations for 14 years, the federal agent said evenly while staring directly at Briggs, including domestic strategic consulting for law enforcement accountability reviews. And the words hit Briggs harder than shouting ever could, because suddenly the man he treated like an inconvenience was someone trained to dissect high-pressure incidents for a living. Marcus slowly looked toward his father with widened eyes, because even he had never heard that title spoken aloud before. Elias finally stepped forward again, calm as ever, rainwater sliding down the side of his face while his eyes locked onto Briggs with unnerving stillness. "My son followed every command tonight," he said quietly. "So I am going to ask you one more time before this situation moves beyond your control." And even the thunder rolling above Atlanta could not drown out the weight behind his next words. "Why were your officers preparing to use force against an unarmed 17-year-old boy?" Rainwater streamed through the parking lot drains while tension spread across the scene like electricity searching for somewhere to strike, because nobody there expected the night to unravel this way. Not the officers, not the bystanders, and certainly not Officer Daniel Briggs, whose confidence was beginning to crack beneath the pressure of too many witnesses and too many unanswered questions. The federal agent standing beside Elias Reed tapped the tablet screen once and turned it toward the gathered officers, revealing synchronized timestamps from dispatch audio, patrol vehicle logs, and nearby traffic cameras that captured nearly every minute leading up to the stop. And suddenly the story Briggs had repeated with such certainty no longer matched the evidence unfolding in front of everyone. The reported robbery suspect was described as 6'3" with visible neck tattoos and a gray pickup truck, the agent stated calmly while rain drummed against the tablet casing. Marcus Reed is 5'9", 17 years old, driving a silver Honda Accord registered legally to his father. And silence immediately swallowed the parking lot, because facts have a way of stripping fear down to what it really is. Marcus lowered his eyes again as embarrassment and exhaustion settled over him, heavier than the storm itself, because even though he had done nothing wrong, he still felt trapped inside a situation he could not control. And across the crowd, several people recording the encounter began whispering angrily among themselves, while livestream comments exploded online, demanding explanations from the department. Briggs tried to regain footing by pointing toward the alley behind the gas station. There was a suspicious sound, and the suspect became uncooperative. He insisted. But one of the younger officers shifted uncomfortably before quietly speaking up. "Sir," he complied the entire time. And the moment those words left the officer's mouth, Briggs looked at him with the sharp betrayal of a man realizing loyalty was beginning to disappear around him. Elias watched all of it without raising his voice. Because men trained in command understand something most people do not. When systems begin collapsing under truth, panic does the rest of the work for you. Imagine standing there while strangers debate whether your child deserved to be feared simply because someone felt uncomfortable around him. Because Elias could see Marcus shrinking inward beneath the weight of public humiliation even though the evidence already proved his innocence. And in that moment Elias realized the deepest damage was not physical fear, but psychological. The silent lesson too many black children learn far too young, that innocence alone does not always protect you. A gust of wind swept through the parking lot, sending rain sideways across the cruisers, while another federal vehicle arrived near the entrance. This time carrying internal affairs investigators from downtown Atlanta, and several officers immediately exchanged alarmed glances because once internal affairs appears at an active scene, careers begin flashing before people's eyes. Nobody leaves, one investigator announced firmly while stepping beneath the gas station awning. All body camera footage is being secured immediately, and Briggs's expression changed for the first time from defensive to genuinely worried because deep down, he already knew moments from earlier would not survive close scrutiny. Marcus looked toward his father with disbelief, still struggling to understand why federal investigators seemed to know Elias personally, and quietly he asked, "Dad, what exactly did you do in the military?" Elias remained silent for a few seconds while thunder rolled across the Atlanta skyline, before finally answering in the calmest voice imaginable. "I spent years stopping situations before innocent people got hurt." And although the sentence sounded simple, everyone listening could feel the weight hiding behind it. Then one of the internal affairs investigators approached Elias respectfully and handed him a sealed folder already marked with the Atlanta Police Department insignia. "Commander, read," the investigator said carefully. "You should know this is not the first complaint involving Officer Briggs." And suddenly the night stopped feeling like one bad mistake and started feeling like the beginning of something much darker. The sealed internal affairs folder felt heavier than paper when Elias Reed opened it beneath the flickering gas station lights, because the moment he saw Officer Daniel Briggs's name repeated across multiple complaint summaries, something inside him shifted from concern to certainty. Rain continued falling across the parking lot, while officers stood in tense silence watching the investigation slowly move beyond their control. And one by one the younger patrolmen, who had arrived confident earlier, now avoided eye contact completely because deep down they understood what was happening. This was no longer about one frightened teenager during a traffic stop. This was about a pattern. Elias scanned the reports calmly, while Marcus stood nearby wrapped in a gray emergency blanket handed to him by one of the federal agents. His wet curls pressed against his forehead, exhaustion replacing fear now that the adrenaline was fading. And for the first time all night, he looked like what he truly was. Just a 17-year-old kid dragged into the center of a system already prepared to assume the worst about him. 3 excessive force complaints, one internal affairs investigator said quietly while standing beside Elias. 2 racial profiling accusations, all unresolved, and nearby officers shifted uncomfortably as Briggs immediately snapped back defensively. None of those accusations were proven, but even his own voice sounded weaker now, thinner somehow, because the authority he hid behind all night was beginning to crack under the weight of public scrutiny and recorded evidence. Across social media, the livestream footage had already spread far beyond Atlanta as local activists, journalists, and former military accounts began reposting clips showing Marcus complying while officers escalated around him. And the comments below the videos reflected something deeper than outrage. They reflected exhaustion from people tired of watching fear become justification over and over again. Imagine being forced to prove your innocence while standing soaked in the rain under flashing police lights simply because someone decided your existence looked suspicious. Because Marcus kept replaying the encounter inside his head, searching for the moment everything turned against him, wondering if he spoke too quietly, moved too slowly, breathed too hard, as though survival itself had become a performance where one wrong gesture could cost you your dignity. Elias closed the folder slowly, before looking toward Briggs again, and unlike the officers surrounding him, Elias did not appear angry anymore. He appeared focused, which somehow felt far more dangerous. "You stopped my son because he fit a story already written in your head," Elias said calmly. "And when reality stopped matching that story, you escalated instead of correcting yourself." And Briggs tried to interrupt, but Elias continued speaking with the same measured tone commanders used before difficult decisions. "That is how innocent people end up harmed by systems that refuse accountability." Thunder rolled overhead, while another internal affairs officer approached carrying secured body camera units collected from the scene. And suddenly one of the younger patrol officers hesitated before speaking quietly enough that only those nearby could hear. "Sir, Briggs told us to leave the cameras running after dispatch already cleared the robbery description." And the moment those words escaped, the entire parking lot seemed to freeze because even Briggs's own partners were beginning to separate themselves from him. Briggs immediately turned toward the officer with panic flashing behind his eyes for the first time all night. "Watch your mouth," he barked sharply. But the damage was already done because truth spreads quickly once fear loses control of a room. Marcus looked toward his father again, confusion mixing with admiration because despite everything happening around them, Elias never once raised his voice, never threatened anyone, never lost control, and somehow that calmness was dismantling the entire situation more effectively than anger ever could. Then one of the federal agents stepped closer holding a phone displaying dozens of incoming media alerts before quietly informing Elias. "Commander Reed, national outlets are picking up the footage now." And as cameras from local news crews began arriving at the edges of the parking lot, Officer Daniel Briggs finally realized the storm surrounding him was no longer just rain. By midnight, the storm over Atlanta had begun to weaken, but the pressure surrounding the gas station only intensified as television vans lined the edge of the street with satellite dishes pointed toward the sky, while reporters stood beneath umbrellas speaking urgently into cameras about the viral footage already spreading across the country. And through it all, Marcus Reed remained sitting quietly near the back of the federal SUV wrapped in a dry blanket, watching his entire life transform in a matter of hours because one frightened assumption had nearly turned him into another headline people debated for 2 days before forgetting. Officer Daniel Briggs stood near the patrol vehicles speaking intense whispers with department supervisors who had arrived minutes earlier, but every conversation seemed shorter now, colder somehow. Because nobody wanted to stand too close to a situation becoming nationally visible by the second. Elias Reed remained exactly where he had been for nearly an hour, calm beneath the fading rain, while internal affairs investigators reviewed body camera footage inside one of the command vehicles. And several younger officers kept glancing toward him with a mixture of respect and discomfort because they could sense something rare unfolding in real time. A man refusing to let rage control him while still dismantling an entire narrative through patience and truth alone. Then the first major revelation arrived. An investigator stepped out holding printed dispatch transcripts while speaking directly to department leadership within earshot of the surrounding officers. The robbery suspect was cleared by another unit 12 minutes before Officer Briggs initiated the stop, he announced firmly, and instantly the remaining justification behind the encounter collapsed completely. Briggs stepped forward immediately trying to defend himself. Dispatch communications were unclear, he argued. But one of the supervisors interrupted him coldly. "Your body camera recorded the update notification." And suddenly, even Briggs realized there was nowhere left to hide. Because evidence remembers what pride tries to erase. Imagine learning that your child's fear, humiliation, and public shame happened after officers already knew he was innocent. Because Marcus overheard the conversation from the SUV and lowered his head quietly as the truth settled into him heavier than before. Not because he expected fairness from the beginning, but because hearing confirmation still hurt in ways he could not explain. Elias slowly walked toward his son and crouched beside him for the first time all night, the noise of reporters and sirens fading into the background while Marcus stared at the wet pavement beneath his sneakers. "You stayed calm," Elias said quietly. "I need you to understand something important tonight. None of this happened because you failed." And Marcus swallowed hard before finally asking the question he had been holding inside for hours. "Then why did they look at me like I was dangerous?" Elias paused for several seconds because some truths feel impossible for fathers to explain to their children no matter how much life experience they carry. And when he finally answered, his voice sounded heavier than before. Because some people see fear before they see humanity. Nearby, several officers silently removed their body cameras and handed them to investigators while Briggs stood isolated beside his cruiser watching the scene collapse around him piece by piece. And for the first time that night, he looked less like an authority figure and more like a man realizing consequences had finally caught up with him. The federal agent approached Elias again, holding a secure phone before speaking carefully. "Commander Reed, Washington wants a briefing by morning." And several nearby reporters immediately reacted after overhearing the title once more, because now the story was growing beyond local misconduct. It was becoming symbolic of something much larger across the country. One reporter shouted from behind the barricade, "Commander Reed, do you believe this was racial profiling?" And the entire parking lot seemed to hold its breath waiting for his answer. Elias looked toward the cameras, then toward Marcus sitting silently beneath the SUV light, and finally toward Officer Briggs standing alone in the rain. And when he spoke, his voice remained controlled, steady, impossible to ignore. "I believe fear becomes dangerous when people with authority stop questioning their own assumptions." And in that moment, even the reporters stopped talking because the truth landed harder than anger ever could. By 3 o'clock in the morning, the rain had finally stopped over Atlanta, leaving behind wet streets glowing beneath streetlights and news cameras still parked outside the gas station, where one ordinary night had transformed into a national conversation about fear, authority, and the cost of assumptions. Officer Daniel Briggs stood near the back of an internal affairs vehicle while investigators collected final statements from witnesses and officers, and although no handcuffs touched his wrists, the expression on his face revealed something deeper than punishment. It revealed the terrifying realization that the protection he always believed would shield him forever was disappearing under the weight of truth. Marcus Reed sat quietly inside the federal SUV beside his father while reporters continued broadcasting live updates outside. And despite the exhaustion in his eyes, there was also something else now. Understanding, painful understanding, because in just a few hours he had learned how quickly innocence could become invisible once fear entered the room. Elias Reed watched his son carefully before speaking in the low, steady voice Marcus had trusted his entire life. "Tonight was never about who you are," he said. "It was about what some people saw before they even gave you a chance to speak." And Marcus stared through the window toward the flashing lights still reflecting off the wet pavement before quietly asking, "Does it ever stop?" Elias did not answer immediately because some questions carry generations inside them. And after several long seconds, he finally looked toward the dark Atlanta skyline and spoke with the honesty of a father who refused to lie to his child. "Only when enough people decide truth matters more than fear." Outside, the vehicle reporters gathered near the barricades as department officials stepped before cameras to announce that Officer Briggs had been placed on immediate administrative leave, pending full investigation into misconduct, racial profiling allegations, and procedural violations connected to the stop. And as microphones pushed closer beneath the bright lights, Briggs lowered his head for the first time all night, because public accountability feels very different when the cameras are no longer protecting you. Across social media, millions of people watched clips from the encounter, while veterans groups, civil rights organizations, and law enforcement leaders debated the footage on national television. But the moment spreading faster than any other was not the confrontation itself. It was the image of Elias Reed standing silently beside his frightened son in the rain, refusing to lose control while demanding accountability through discipline instead of chaos. Imagine surviving battlefields overseas, only to discover your greatest fear was not war itself, but whether your child would make it safely through an ordinary night at a gas station. Because Elias understood something many people never do. Strength is not measured by how loudly a man reacts when anger arrives. It is measured by whether he protects his humanity when the world gives him every reason to lose it. As dawn slowly approached, Marcus and Elias finally stepped out of the SUV together, while reporters continued shouting questions behind the barricades. But neither father nor son looked toward the cameras, because some moments are too personal to perform for the public. They walked quietly toward the silver Honda still parked beneath the gas station lights, while exhausted officers cleared the remaining vehicles from the scene. And before getting inside the car, Marcus stopped and looked back one final time at the parking lot where his entire understanding of America had changed forever. Elias placed a hand on his shoulder and gently guided him toward the passenger door. And in that quiet moment, there were no sirens, no shouting, no flashing cameras left between them. Only a father trying to help his son carry the weight of a lesson no child should ever have to learn. The city slowly woke around them as the first traces of morning light touched the wet streets of Atlanta, and somewhere beyond the fading storm, millions of people were still arguing about policy, race, police, and accountability. But for Marcus Reed, the truth had become painfully simple. Sometimes the most dangerous thing a person can carry is not a weapon, but an assumption. And sometimes the strongest men are not the ones who go searching for revenge, but the fathers who stand calmly in the storm long enough to make the truth impossible to ignore.